Here, beside the St. John River, the Loyalist spirit lingers. More than a museum, King's Landing Historical Settlement is a restored village that recreates 19th century rural New Brunswick. It is the past brought to busy life. Welcome to King's Landing.
This grist mill, it dates back to 1880. It's powered by a water turbine. Now we started out, we turned the mill on in the morning, go up the dam, open the gate and let the water in to get the turbine turning. Then we have this bin over in the corner where we start out. Now we put the buckwheat in there, a conveyor takes it up the top floor to a storage bin. Now the buckwheat is fed down onto the ladle, which that stick going around is called the damsel. Its purpose is to wiggle the ladle and work the buckwheat in the center of the stones. Now all these old expressions you hear along the way all relate back to something in the olden times. Now damsel in distress come these stone mills. Now what it is, that damsel stick around the corner is driven off the top stone. Now if that top stone is out of balance, gets going too fast, the stone will get rock and wobbling, it'll shake that damsel stick. So that's where that expression came from, the damsel in distress, from these stone mills. Now you notice that end of the sifter is higher than that end, so as it rotates, it works its way to the low side. Now it has a silk screen on this section that lets the buckwheat flour out in this area out here. Now buckwheat is a type of grain, is when the settlers came here, it's a tradition they brought with them. They had buckwheat before they had potatoes, or the hard wheat, or oats, or anything like that. You never had to ask what you were going to have for dinner or supper. You knew it was going to be buckwheat pancakes.
Buckwheat pancakes may have been on every table, but the tables were definitely not the same. King's Landing's historic houses reflect the social distinctions of the era and are restored and furnished as they would have been between 1820 and the turn of the century.
Welcome to the Jones House. It's one of our earlier homes in the village. It's the home of Thomas Jones and his family. Thomas lived here with his wife and two small children and also his mother at this time. Thomas was Justice of the Peace for the parish of Prince William. He was also part owner of a sawmill and had a lot of land in the area, so it's considered to be a well-to-do home.
Over here in the corner, we have an indoor spring. They built their home right over the top of the spring, so we have the indoor water. And behind me is a dry sink, and it drains to the outside. So that's quite unique. We're also built into a hillside here, mainly for the simple fact that they would attempt to keep their flatlands for farming, and hillsides were not very much used to them. So it was common to find hill houses in this area.
With 5 people and only 1 bedroom, the Lint family would have been a little less comfortable.
This is the home of Lawrence Lint, which is 1830. Lawrence Lint is a shoemaker. He would have had 3 children. They're small at this time. And he would have done his cobbling in the kitchen in the winter or outside in the yard in the summer. He would have had a shop. They're using wooden dishes because they would use what would be available to them and what they could afford also. They probably couldn't afford, you know, even the cheap china dishes. For example, Thomas Jones would have had porcelain dishes, and it's the same time period as this.
Luxuries may have been scarce in 19th century New Brunswick, but the necessities could be found in the rich soil of the St. John River Valley.
Oh, when the sun in the morning peeps over the hill, and it kisses the roses round my windowsill, then my heart fills with blood.
The oldest part of the Joslin farmhouse dates back to the 1790s. Additions were built in the next generation as the farm prospered and the household grew. By 1860, as many as a dozen people might be expected to sit down to dinner. There was a lot of cooking to be done.
We're going to have beans and pancakes today for dinner, and an apple pie Valerie's making. And then later on this afternoon, we'll be making a steamed plum pudding.
You have your pies already made?
We have one in the oven here cooking now.
Beautiful.
Pie. This is the way you make apple cider.
Even in a hard-working village, there was time for celebration. The fair was an eagerly awaited distraction from everyday life.
Blacksmiths at that time were so important that without them the village would have died. Everybody that comes into a blacksmith shop thinks that we did nothing but make horseshoes all day. Well, we made horseshoes. We made ox shoes as well. And then we made the nail, we made the hammer that drove it. We made the axe that cut the tree, we made the scythe that cut the hay and the barley. And without barley, of course, the pub would have no beer, and neither would the blacksmith. But I need 2,600 degrees before the steel will start to melt. At that point, when I hit it, I'll fuse both pieces together, and that's what you call a forged weld. Approaching the temperature now, so I need some magic powder by. And we need magic powder to make a weld, because without it, the steel is impure. And we'll clean that steel now. Now we heat it up to the welding temperature. There should be no problem when you got good coal. But if you came to a blacksmith shop and you had nothing to pay him with, what would you do? Come off the boat and you only got the shirt on your back. The government has given you 100 acres of land, which has to be cleared. You have no house, no firewood. First thing you're going to need is an axe. Come see the blacksmith. Can you make me an axe? The blacksmith says, yes, sir, I can make you an axe. What have you got to pay me? Nothing, sir. Well, fine then. I'll give you this axe and you go off onto your property there. Dig yourself a pit and start cutting wood because I want 10 barrels of charcoal for that axe.
Because if I didn't have a source of coal, I would have had to use charcoal.
Necessity has always been the mother of invention, and the two-horse saw saved a lot of time in cutting firewood. On a larger scale, water took the place of horsepower.
This would be representative of a typical 1830 sawmill for this area. We're completely water powered and we have a vertical straight cut up and down saw. From daylight till dark, with good sized saw logs and sawing 1-inch boards, this mill can produce about 10 times as much lumber as 2 men doing it by hand. Basically from the mill pond we use a set of tongs, a block and tackle, and power from the water wheel to power a capstan pulley. And that will pull the logs from the mill pond into the mill itself. When the logs are on the deck next to the carriage, we'll pick the logs we want to saw, lay down a couple of timbers and roll the log onto the carriage, fasten it down, and proceed to take 4 slabs off an individual log. We have to take these 4 slabs off to get a square of timber, and then we'll slice that into boards or planks as we need it. So this slab wood was generally used for firewood, but quite often they could build a fence with slab wood, or they could build a rough outbuilding with it. Nothing went to waste. Well, actually, most business was conducted on a barter system. As neighborhood people, everybody would have timber on their land. So as a mill owner, he would go and deal with these people. Perhaps if he had lumber, he would in turn get some logs for them. Or if you had your logs and you wanted to bring them to the mill, bring them in here, we would saw those logs for you, and we would keep a portion in payment, strictly on the barter system. And we have a set rate here at Jones's Mill. It's 5% of all the lumber that we saw. We will keep here in payment of that. Then we in turn may trade that with the storekeeper for some supplies that we might need of our own. As far as we can tell, this would be as close to 100% authentic for a mill of this period. And probably our mill here is about as new and improved as this type of mill ever got, due to the fact that after 1860, when circular saws were available, just about all these mills were converted over to circular saws.
Stand clear.
The lumbermen of the 19th century were busy farming all summer, and in the fall returned to their work in the logging camps. Without roads through the woods, the river was the main highway. It not only carried logs to the mill, but delivered sawn lumber and agricultural products to market.
The farmers who made these boats didn't have a lot of money to work with, so they were made out of really crude materials. They gave reference to some of them being plugged, sealed with cow dung. That's how primitive they were. So, the lifespan was not very long. Ours is a reproduction made in 1975. The originals were about 2 to 3 times bigger. They were used from about 1830 to 1880. For the rivers in New Brunswick, and during that time there were about 250 of these boats made. They were made specifically to carry lumber and grain. They'd go down the harbor in St. John maybe, they'd sell their lumber, and in exchange they'd bring back things they couldn't make or buy in their villages.
Sound the pibroch loud and high, would jot the brooks to the isle sky. Let every clan their slogans cry, we'll fight and die for Charlie.
The village inn is the place to meet friends and rest a while. The traditional stopover, good for a hot meal or a cold drink. Almost every settlement boasted a church or meeting house, but few could afford a full-time clergyman. Traveling preachers made the rounds of the villages, with local men taking the pulpit between visits.
In its true light, this transient life regard, this is a state of trial, not reward.
This not-so-cheerful motto isn't an epitaph. It graces the wall of King's Landing's one-room schoolhouse. Looking at the stiff benches and the cast-iron stove, we have to be grateful that schools have changed.
Under a spreading chestnut tree, the village smithy stands. The smith, a mighty man is he, with large and sinewy hands.
Even in Loyalist times, when reading was a relatively rare accomplishment, the printer was a busy man.
A well-trained man can do 500 sheets within an hour or an hour and a half if he's very quick.
Speed was essential because every printing job had to be set by hand, letter by letter, line by line. Once the type was set, the printer locked it into a metal frame and mounted that plate in the press. Our print shop uses a platen press, typical of the late 1800s. Rollers pick up ink from the platen or ink disc at the top of the machine, then roll the ink across the frame of type before the paper is pressed against it. Many of the posters used at King's Landing are printed right here.
Get together, folks!
You're bad.
Poor Billy.
You couldn't make up chicken Billy without cake.
The ink pellets here are used in the inkwell. Just drop one in and add a little water. And a couple of opal brooches. Quite a lot of fire in them, right? Yeah.
Mr. Grant would have been very proud of his stock that he has here, I think. I'm sure that his attitude would have been, if we don't have it, you probably don't need it. And pretty well everything in here is 100 years old, or at least it represents something that would have been in the store 100 years ago. But certainly he had a tremendous stock in here, everything from tobacco and spices. They would have probably have sold a lot of spices. Many of the people who lived here locally would have had their own gardens where they would have been producing their own potatoes and peas and beans and corn, things like that. But the specialty items, like spices, he would have sold a lot of those. Black pepper, nutmeg, cinnamon. On down the aisle there we have quite a complete drugstore. They would have sold Scotch, whiskey, wine, and beer, certainly just for medicinal purposes, because he did rent the upstairs portion of the building to the Sons of Temperance League. So it would have been just for medicinal purposes. And all kinds of pots and pans to sell, and certainly lots of tools, things that could have been made in the blacksmith shop. Hats, we sold lots of cloth materials and things like that. Buttons, ribbons, and so on. And there's earthen crocks and china that would have come from England and Some of the china I find quite fascinating. I wish I knew more about it, but it doesn't even have the manufacturer's name on the bottom. It's that old. Apparently it was the late 1890s before they started putting manufacturer's name on the bottom of the china.
How is business today?
Pretty good, thank you. Pretty good. Pretty good.
Mr. Gramps would occasionally forget what he had sold and who to bill it to. He wouldn't remember who had bought a particular item through the day. If that happened, he would just charge one out to every customer that had been in the store that day. And if the customer complained, he would take it off his bill, and just by the process of elimination, he would be able to charge the proper person.
The bills were sometimes paid in cash, but often the storekeeper would be happy to accept goods he could resell, fresh produce from the farm, or the products of the local craftsman.
Sometimes my heart cries when I walk by a fire place and I saw the good wood they burn.
Yeah.
This I salvaged this morning from burning.
That's got
So
a
I'm
lovely
gonna-
bit of color
yeah.
there. Lovely
And the
bit of
grain,
color.
look how straight it is, yeah? So that gives you a marvelous spoon like that. Now you pick up a spoon you made and put on top of it and scribe the pattern on it, yeah? And then you cut it out, see here, that fits. That's from the piece I split a while back. Now I'm shaping the outside. The bowl here is done with a gouge. If you have sharp tools, they do the work for you. All you have to do is guide them.
It's like coring an apple.
Yeah, see? This would have been strictly a winter job. Yeah. In the summer, he would have went probably from house to house. The carpenter would have, at that time, be a traveler carpenter. He would have had a tool chest like you see on the floor there. And this was folded tools. About 24 sets of planes and all kinds of chisel, gouges, knives, saws, and he would have traveled from farm to farm or from community to community.
This is New Brunswick's heritage. Each new generation holds something of our past. Quiet strength, perseverance, and a spirit of true community. Centuries pass, but the old values endure. And King's Landing celebrates that legacy.